My father looked at the man holding my hand, then laughed. A janitor? He turned toward the executives gathered around the engagement dinner. My daughter turned down millionaires for the guy who empties our trash. The room exploded with laughter. My mother quietly slid an envelope across the table. If you marry him, don't ever call us your family again. 5 years later, that same janitor walked into my father's boardroom. The chairman stood up, smiled, and said, "Congratulations, everyone. Your new owner has arrived." My father's smile disappeared the moment he recognized my husband. People think growing up rich means growing up happy. They're wrong. My name is Olivia Carter, and for 27 years, I lived inside a house that looked like it belonged on the cover of an architecture magazine. 5 bedrooms, indoor pool, private tennis court, luxury cars lined up in the driveway. To everyone outside our gates, we were the perfect family. Inside, everything had a price, including love. My father, Richard Carter, built Carter Industries into one of the largest manufacturing companies in the state. He often reminded us of that. Success, he'd say, belongs to people willing to sacrifice everything. The problem was, he expected everyone else to make those sacrifices too, especially me. From the day I graduated college, my future had already been planned. Marry someone important, join the company, represent the Carter name, smile at charity galas, pretend appearances mattered more than happiness. I did the second part. I became a financial analyst at Carter Industries, but I never wanted the first. Every week, my mother handed me another business card. He's a surgeon. His father owns 3 hotels. He's a senator's son. Every conversation ended the same way. You deserve someone successful. I smiled politely every time. Inside, I wondered if anyone had ever asked what I deserved. Every morning at exactly 6:15, I'd stop by the company cafe, not because of the coffee, because Ethan was usually there. He wore dark blue maintenance overalls, work gloves, steel-toe boots. Most executives walked past him without looking. Some didn't even bother saying hello. Yet somehow, he always smiled first. One rainy morning, I accidentally dropped an entire folder of financial reports. Papers flew across the lobby. Dozens of employees stepped around them. Nobody stopped, except Ethan. Without saying a word, he knelt on the marble floor, helping me gather every page. When we finished, I noticed grease stains on his sleeves. "I'm sorry," I said. "You probably have better things to do." He laughed. "Helping someone isn't a waste of time." That sentence stayed with me longer than I expected. Over the next few months, we kept running into each other, sometimes in the cafe, sometimes in the parking garage, sometimes late at night when I stayed at the office finishing reports. I learned something surprising. Ethan wasn't just smart, he was brilliant. He could explain economics, engineering, robotics, even history. One evening, I asked the obvious question, if you're this intelligent, why are you working here as a janitor? For a moment, he looked away, then smiled, because life doesn't always introduce you at your best chapter. That answer only made me more curious. Months later, he finally trusted me enough to tell me. Years earlier, he had founded a robotics startup with his best friend. They designed automation systems for factories. The company attracted investors. Everything was going perfectly. Until his business partner disappeared, taking the investors' money, the patents, the bank accounts, everything. Because Ethan's name remained on many of the contracts, creditors came after him. He lost his apartment, his savings, his reputation. No company would hire him, so he accepted the only job available, night maintenance, at Carter Industries, not because he lacked talent, because he needed time to rebuild. Every night after finishing work, instead of going home, he spent 4 more hours in a rented garage, building prototypes, writing software, starting over, piece by piece. "I'll build another company," he told me one evening. "I just have to survive long enough." Most people would have laughed. I didn't, because I believed him. Our first date wasn't expensive, just tacos from a food truck. We sat on the hood of his old pickup truck, watching airplanes fly overhead. He apologized. "I wish I could take you somewhere nicer." I laughed. "This is the nicest date I've ever been on." He looked confused. "What about those fancy restaurants your parents like?" "They're beautiful," I admitted, "but nobody actually talks." That night, for the first time in years, I felt seen, not as Richard Carter's daughter, not as a future executive, just Olivia. Months became a year, then 2. We built a life together, a tiny apartment, second-hand furniture, movie nights with homemade popcorn, Sunday morning pancakes, everything my parents would have called ordinary. To me, it felt extraordinary. One autumn evening, Ethan asked me to meet him at the old city park, the same place where we'd shared our first real conversation. He looked nervous. "I wanted to buy a huge diamond," he admitted, but he reached into his pocket. I realized something. He opened a small velvet box. Inside was a simple ring. I'd rather spend my money building our future than pretending I already have one. Then he got down on one knee. "Olivia Carter, will you marry me?" Before he even finished, I was crying. Yes, 100 times yes. Telling my parents should have been joyful. Instead, it became the worst night of my life. Dad insisted on hosting an engagement dinner. "Bring him," he said. "We'd like to meet the man." I actually believed they were trying. I couldn't have been more wrong. The dining room glittered with crystal chandeliers. Company executives filled the room, business partners, politicians, family friends, nearly 50 people. Dad stood, raised his glass. "I'd like everyone to meet the man my daughter plans to marry." Ethan stood politely. Dad smiled. "So, what department are you in?" "Facilities," Ethan answered. "I work maintenance." "Maintenance?" Dad frowned. "The night janitorial team." Silence. Then laughter. Not one person, the entire room. Mom covered her smile with a napkin. Daniel whispered loudly, "Guess someone has to clean the executive bathrooms." More laughter. I felt my face burning. Dad looked directly at Ethan. "You honestly think you belong in this family?" Ethan answered calmly, "I believe I belong beside Olivia." That only made things worse. Dad slammed his wineglass onto the table. "You have absolutely nothing. No money, no reputation, no future." Then he turned toward me. "And you're throwing your life away." Mom quietly slid a legal envelope across the table. "If you marry him, you'll receive nothing from this family. No trust, no inheritance, no company, no home, nothing." The room fell silent. She waited, expecting me to change my mind. Instead, I reached across the table, took Ethan's hand, looked both my parents in the eyes, and said, "Then I guess I'd rather start with nothing than spend the rest of my life with everything except happiness." I stood. Ethan stood beside me. Without another word, we walked out. Neither of my parents tried to stop us. As the heavy doors closed behind us, I heard my father say one final sentence: "Losing her will be the biggest mistake of her life." I didn't look back. 6 months later, life was still difficult. Bills piled up. Ethan worked nights cleaning offices. I worked long hours to support us. Then, on an ordinary Tuesday morning, his phone rang. He stared at the screen for a second servals before answering. "Hello?" The person on the other end spoke for less than a minute. When Ethan hung up, he didn't say anything. He simply looked at me with tears in his eyes. "What happened?" I whispered. For the first time since I'd known him, he smiled like someone's entire future had just changed. They found me. Who? He took a slow breath. The investors. They read my new prototype. I stared at him. They want another meeting. I could barely breathe. You mean? He nodded. This time, they're offering to fund the company. As Ethan hugged me, neither of us noticed the television quietly playing in the background. A business reporter was covering breaking news. Carter Industries shares have fallen another 18% today after concerns about executive leadership. The camera showed my father's company headquarters. For the first time in decades, the empire that had cost him his daughter was beginning to crumble. People love saying, money changes people. They're wrong. Money doesn't change people. It reveals who they already were. 5 years after my parents disowned me, I was about to find out just how true that was. Life after the wedding wasn't glamorous. Our apartment was barely 600 square feet. The heater worked only when it felt like it. Our dining table came from a thrift store. Our couch had been left on the curb by someone moving away. But every single thing inside that apartment belonged to us. Not my parents, not a family trust, not an inheritance. Us. Every morning, Ethan left before sunrise to clean offices. Every evening, I worked late as a financial consultant. And every night, long after most people had gone to bed, the lights inside our tiny garage stayed on. Because Ethan wasn't just rebuilding his life, he was rebuilding his dream. The shelves were filled with motors, sensors, circuit boards, notebooks covered in calculations, and half-finished machines. I didn't understand everything he was creating, but I understood one thing. He refused to quit. One night, around 2 a.m, I walked into the garage carrying 2 cups of coffee. Ethan was asleep at his workbench. His laptop was still open. Dozens of emails covered the screen. Most had the same subject line. Thank you for your submission, but we've decided not to invest. Rejection after rejection. I gently touched his shoulder. Ethan. He woke up instantly. I'm sorry. I must have fallen asleep. I smiled. You've been working for 16 hours. He rubbed his eyes. I'm getting closer. Closer to what? He looked at the small robotic arm sitting on the workbench, changing everything. 6 months later, that phone call changed our lives. The investors, they want another meeting. I still remember how tightly he held my hand during the drive. Neither of us said much. We'd been disappointed before, but this felt different. Inside the conference room sat 4 investors. No smiles, no promises, just questions. For nearly 3 hours, Ethan explained his software, how it could help factories detect equipment failures before they happened, how it could reduce waste, lower costs, increase safety. When he finished, the room was silent. Finally, the oldest investor stood up. I rejected this idea 3 years ago. Ethan nodded. I remember. I was wrong. He slid a folder across the table. Inside was an investment offer, $25 million for a controlling stake in Ethan's company. I looked at Ethan, he looked at me. Neither of us could speak. After years of hearing no, someone had finally said yes. Time has a funny way of proving people wrong. 5 years passed faster than we imagined. The tiny garage became a warehouse. The warehouse became a headquarters. Our software spread across factories in Europe, Asia, North America. Within 5 years, Brooks Automation became one of the fastest-growing industrial technology companies in the country. Business magazines called Ethan a visionary. Universities invited him to speak. Investors who once ignored him now competed for meetings. Yet, every Friday evening, he still visited the same garage. He never let anyone tear it down. Whenever reporters asked why, he smiled. Because success is easier to appreciate when you remember where failure lived. Meanwhile, Carter Industries wasn't doing well. After I left, my father promoted my brother Daniel to Chief Operating Officer. Daniel loved expensive offices, fancy presentations, big announcements. He hated details. He ignored engineers, cut maintenance budgets, delayed equipment upgrades, fired experienced employees to hire his friends. Profits dropped, customers left, stock prices fell. Banks became nervous. Within 5 years, the company my father had spent 40 years building was fighting to survive. Still, his pride remained untouched. Whenever someone suggested selling, he laughed. The Carter family never loses. He had no idea someone else was already buying. One Monday morning, my father received an urgent phone call. The board is calling an emergency meeting. Why? We've lost controlling ownership. He frowned. That's impossible. It happened overnight. A private investment group purchased 48% of the company. My father's coffee cup slipped from his hand. The executive boardroom hadn't changed. Same polished table, same leather chairs, same portraits of former CEOs. Only this time, the atmosphere was different. Fear had replaced confidence. Directors whispered to one another. Lawyers reviewed paperwork. Everyone waited for the mysterious buyer. The chairman stood. "Ladies and gentlemen, our new majority shareholder has arrived." The doors opened. I walked in first. Every face turned toward me. My father blanked. Olivia? Then Ethan entered. Tailored navy suit, simple watch, confident smile. No one recognized him immediately until my brother whispered, "Wait, the janitor?" Silence. Complete silence. The chairman smiled. "I'd like everyone to meet Mr. Ethan Brooks, founder and CEO of Brooks Automation, and, as of this morning, the majority owner of Carter Industries." My father's face lost every bit of color. Dad slowly stood. "No, this isn't possible." Ethan remained calm. "It wasn't impossible. You just never looked past the uniform." Nobody laughed this time. The same executives who had mocked Ethan 5 years earlier now avoided eye contact. My mother looked as though she might faint. Daniel couldn't even speak. The media immediately began reporting rumors. Will Ethan Brooks fire the Carter family? Will he dismantle Carter Industries? Is this the greatest corporate revenge story in years? Employees expected a bloodbath. So did the board. The chairman looked toward Ethan. "Your first order of business?" Everyone waited. Ethan slowly stood. "I have one announcement." He looked around the room. "I didn't buy this company to destroy it. I bought it because 6,000 employees deserved better leadership than the people who forgot they built this company." He looked toward the maintenance supervisor sitting quietly near the back, then toward the factory managers, then the engineers. The people cleaning the floors, the people fixing the machines, the people working night shifts, they built this company. And from today forward, they'll finally be treated like that. The room erupted into applause. Not polite applause, real applause, the kind earned through respect. An independent audit began immediately. It uncovered years of poor decisions, lavish executive spending, unqualified promotions, ignored safety warnings, millions wasted. No criminal fraud, just arrogance. The board voted unanimously. Richard Carter would retire. Daniel would step down from executive leadership. Both would receive fair severance packages. Nothing more. As everyone prepared to leave, my father quietly approached Ethan. For the first time in his life, he looked small. "I owe you an apology." He nodded politely. "You do. I judged you because of your job. I assumed your uniform defined your future." He looked at me. "And I lost my daughter because I cared more about appearances than happiness." I waited. For years, I imagined this moment. I thought hearing those words would heal everything. It didn't. Some wounds don't disappear. They simply stop controlling your life. Dad looked at me. "Can you ever forgive us?" I smiled gently. "I forgave you a long time ago." He looked relieved.
Then I continued, "But forgiveness doesn't erase consequences. You missed 5 years of birthdays, 5 Christmases. You weren't there when we struggled to pay rent. You weren't there when Ethan almost gave up. You weren't there when our daughter was born." My father's eyes filled with tears. "Our granddaughter?" I nodded. "Yes. You've never met her." Silence. Painful silence. Then Ethan spoke. "I know what it's like to be judged. I don't want your family destroyed, but trust," Ethan glanced at me, "has to be rebuilt. Not inherited, not demanded, earned." Carter Industries became profitable again. Employee turnover dropped dramatically. Maintenance workers received raises. Training programs expanded. Scholarships were created for children of factory employees. And one new company policy surprised everyone. Every executive, including the CEO, would spend 1 day every quarter working alongside frontline employees, cleaning, repairing, packing shipments, listening, learning. When reporters asked why, he smiled. Because no one should ever believe they're too important to understand the people who keep a company alive. On the anniversary of our wedding, Ethan and I walked through the headquarters lobby. Our little daughter held one of his hands, mine held the other. Near the entrance, a young janitor was mopping the floor. He looked nervous when he saw the CEO approaching. Ethan smiled. "Tough job?" The young man laughed. "Someone's got to do it." Ethan nodded. "I used to."
The janitor looked confused. "You? 5 years ago." The young man smiled. "I guess anything's possible." Ethan looked at him and said, "Never let anyone tell you your job determines your worth." We continued walking toward the exit. Outside, the morning sun reflected off the company logo. I thought back to the night my father had handed me that envelope. "If you marry him, don't ever come back." He believed he'd ended my future. Instead, he had unknowingly pushed us toward the life we were always meant to build. Because sometimes, the greatest success isn't proving your critics wrong. It's living so well that you no longer need their approval.